Before we start the program, we'd like to share a couple housekeeping items. First, this program is being recorded, and registrants will receive a link to the program recording. Second, you can download a PDF version of this program's PowerPoint presentation in the Handout section of the webinar dashboard. Third, the audience has joined this webinar in listen-only mode. You may submit your text questions via the questions pane of the webinar control panel at any time. We will collect them and address as many as we can during the Q&A session at the end of today's webinar. Hello and welcome to Beyond the On-Campus Interview, Job Search Tips and Looking Ahead. This program is brought to you by the ABA's Law Student Division, Young Lawyers Division, Section of Litigation, and Career Center. ABA membership is free for law students. The Law Student Division offers premium benefits, which includes access and savings for Quimby.com, discounts on bar review programs, up to $50 off West academic casebooks, and a legal ethics bundle that includes a free model Rules of Professional Conduct ebook. Upgrade to premium for only $25. The Young Lawyers Division is the ABA's home for the new attorney, giving members tools to navigate the early years of a career, opportunities to network, and resources to grow your skill sets. ABA lawyer members under the age of 36 or in practice 5 years or less, and law student members are automatically enrolled in the division for free. The Section of Litigation provides students opportunities to network with experienced litigators and resources like quick sound advice podcasts and telephone roundtable discussions, perfect for busy law students. Section membership is free for law students. Join today. The ABA Career Center offers both career development resources and a job board for law students, lawyers, and other legal professionals across all disciplines and career stages. Now, we'll hand things over to Joanne Grages-Burnett to get us started. Joanne?
Thank you so much, Tracy. It's really very exciting to be with you all here today, and I'm excited to be joined by Emily Kirk, who you'll hear from in a little bit. Before we get started, I wanted to give you a brief agenda of the things that we're going to be covering with you here today. First, we're going to start off with what you should be doing right now. Then we're going to move into talk about tips for staying on a private practice path, if that's what you're interested in. We'll then talk about tips for getting on another path outside of the private practice. And then finally, we're going to hear from Emily, who's going to talk about her experiences in her career and also her transition back into a law firm. And then we will have time for your questions. So please get those in if you have them. So the first thing is first. Everything is going to be okay. The fall on-campus interviewing is generally a very well-publicized event on my campus and probably for yours too. But it is truly not the only way that people get jobs. A quick review of your law school employment data will demonstrate that. But we're going to review some things that I think you should be doing right now to stay proactive in your search for a summer experience or for your first job outside of law school. The first thing is first, I think that self-assessment is such an important part of this process. I think it's a good time to reflect on on-campus interviewing thus far. Did you enjoy the process? I think that's important. Why did you enjoy the process? Why didn't you enjoy the process? What things really stood out to you as helpful? What things stood out to you as stressful? What did you learn about yourself in the process? Who did you work with while you were going through this process? Do you need to have someone review your interview skills? Do you need additional interview tips? And I want you to think about what are the 5 most important things you want in your career and really start to outline those and write those down. When you look at those things, are there skills that you are missing? If the firm only hires in the top 10% and you are in the top 40%, you're going to have to market something special to that employer and something different. You ultimately need to showcase what you bring to the table. To think about that, and in terms of applying, make sure your cover letter isn't transactional. Your cover letter is really the space for you to focus on what you bring to the employer, not what the employer can do for you. As you go through this self-assessment, there's a really great resource that I want to bring to your attention. The Predicting Lawyer Effectiveness study reports the results of a multi-year empirical study involving over 3,000 graduates from Berkeley Law School and Hastings College of Law. This study sought to explore additional types of law school admission measures that can predict actual lawyering performance. Through interviews and focus groups involving lawyers, law students, faculty, judges, clients, the professors, the authors of this study identified 26 factors that are most important to lawyering effectiveness. Now, I work with students all the time who have a variety of backgrounds and who have come to law school with a variety of different experiences. Even if those experiences weren't in the legal field, you have had the opportunity to gain some of these skills. For example, I worked with a student who had the claim of working for the busiest Starbucks in the country while she was in college. That's incredible. And I think personally, through that experience, she was able to gain a lot of stress management experience, right? Also organizing and managing others experience, potentially some negotiating skills. And I venture to say that many of you in the experiences that you bring to the table also have experience with some of these very important effectiveness factors. So what I would encourage you to do is to take some time. You'll have these resources with you in the handouts after the program. Take some time, go through these and assess yourself. Determine what you have a lot of experience with and focus on that in your materials. And also determine what you don't yet have a lot of experience in and think about how you can build those experience so that you can increase these particular skills. The next thing I think is important to do is to do a market assessment. So is what you want to do too specific? Is there a market for what you want to do in your area? Are you willing to move to another area to pursue a particular path? For example, if you're really focused on intellectual property, but there isn't a market for your area, are you willing to go somewhere else to pursue intellectual property? Or are you willing to shift your focus to adhere to what the market around you really needs? If you're focused on larger markets, you need to be aware that many other people are too. Markets like New York and DC, which Emily will talk about in a little bit, and Chicago, you have to find ways to stand out. Some of that is through relationships, which we'll talk about. Some of that is through experiences. For smaller markets, I think it's important to show your connection to the market. And that's an opportunity for you to use your cover letter effectively to showcase why you want to be in a particular area. One resource that I like to, or one exercise that I like students to do is to think about this Venn diagram here. What we're really looking for is this sweet spot in the middle of what you want to do, what you're really good at, what you will get paid to do, and what the world needs. And sometimes, in a best case scenario, we're at 3 out of 4. But ultimately, I think it's important for you to think about these things in terms of your own development, in terms of your own goals, and in terms of what the market will support to determine where it is you might want to focus your attention going forward. My next tip is to use the resources around you. Particularly for law students, I really recommend that you go to your career office, whether that's career development, career services, career placement, whatever that is. Use those folks as resources. They know your market, they know your institution, they know the employers in that area. Get to know them really well. The more they know you, the more they can help you. I also recommend that you talk to faculty. Those are great resources, especially if you're very focused on a particular area of the law. I think this tip is especially true if you are a transfer student, if you are an LLM student, if you are an international student, or if you are a non-traditional student. You really, really need to connect to your campus so that they can get to know you and plug you in to the community that you want to be a part of. My next tip is to just keep applying. Many law schools have opportunities all year long. This is truly a marathon, not a sprint. So please don't get discouraged. The most important thing is fit. If you end up at an employer and it's not the right fit for you, no one is going to benefit. It's really important to figure out who it is that you really want to work for and how to best market yourself for them. Different types of firms hire at different times. Larger firms will have, generally speaking, a more structured summer associate program. But Some of those firms may also hire later on 3Ls depending on the firm and depending on the skill set that they're looking for. So it's always important to keep your eye out on the market, keep watching, and also just understand how the different firms that you're interested might hire. Make friends. And I know that law students are under a lot of pressure to network. And for some folks, that's really not ultimately what they're comfortable with. But I need you to go back to that self-assessment part of what we were talking about earlier. I think you need to determine how you best make friends. Reflect on your past friendships and your past relationships. How did you meet those people? Reflect on your past jobs. How did you get those jobs? I often work with students who will say, well, every job I've ever got is because of someone I know. Okay, then why are you spending hours upon hours sending in applications online? You need to not dump the date that got you to the dance. You need to continue to do what has always worked for you when making friends and relationships. I think bar associations are a great place to meet with people in the legal profession who do what you are interested in doing, whether that's affinity bar associations, geographic bar associations, or practice area bar associations. I'd obviously be remiss if I didn't talk about all of the amazing benefits that you just heard about joining the American Bar Association. I think it's a fantastic place for law students. I have certainly benefited from being involved in the Young Lawyers Division, and I think the ABA is a great place to make these relationships. Bar associations are often very cost effective for law students. I'd also encourage you to reach out to your alumni associations, whether that's in your law school or whether that's through your undergraduate institution. Think about informational interviews and how those can be helpful in getting the information that you need, and just continue to reach out to people and continue to use the resources available to you. And then after all that, sit down and make a plan for how you're going to go forward. And I really advocate for a written plan. I think that helps really solidify your goals and fine-tune what you hope to do in the next few months. I think it's really important to get experiences in law school that are going to make you continue to make you more attractive to employers, whether that's a private sector employer or otherwise. I would strongly encourage you to use your law school resources here. Use externships, internships, clinics, pro bono opportunities. Consider serving as a research assistant to a faculty member or a teaching assistant. Consider getting onto one of your journals or law reviews if you aren't already, or your advocacy teams. These are opportunities for you to stay busy, to get experiences, to meet people, and to get out of the classroom, which I think is a really important part of building relationships in the legal profession. So, you've gone through all of that and you say, okay, I've figured it out. I really do want to stay in a firm. And you're going to continue to apply to firms as they become available. But now I want to shift to a couple of other things that I think should be on your radar if you still want to be in the private sector. Judicial clerkships can often lead back to a firm after a 1 or 2 year clerkship, or maybe even longer, if you desire. A lot of folks who go into judicial clerkships do end up going into the private sector afterwards, and they can be really fantastic opportunities for you to build some additional legal experience skills, to meet with, obviously to build relationship with judges and to get a lot of experience working sort of behind the scenes of the judicial process. There are obviously clerkships in the federal system and in the state system, and locally as well. For the state system, and local clerkships, I really recommend going to their individual websites. I think that provides a lot of really great information. For federal judicial clerkships, I do recommend utilizing Oscar as a resource. Oscar for our Rising 2Ls is not quite available yet, but they do have a lot of resources on Oscar, including the applicant prep kit, which I think has a lot of really valuable information. So I would encourage you to consider clerkships. Also keep in mind lateral hiring, and I know Emily will talk a little bit about this as well, but just as a brief overview, some firms will take in new associates through their summer associate program and or may also take in lateral hiring. So if you've had a few years of experience, then sometimes firms will hire you laterally into their organization. And I think it's important here to do a lot of research. If you're very focused on a particular firm, but it didn't work out right now through OCI, I would really use this opportunity to do a lot of research into the associates who are at the firm and determine where their laterals might have come from. Did they come from judicial clerkships, for example? I think it's important you can do research on the law firm itself. You can do research on LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn is an incredible resource for doing research on people and their experiences. And so I think each firm will sort of differ a little bit on the things that they're looking for. But that's an opportunity for you to potentially down the road use a recruiter, have some informational interviews to talk about what you can do in the meantime to make yourself more competitive for that firm. I think those are great ways to really show the firm that you still have a commitment to them and that you're still very interested. I want to pause here for just a moment to talk about in-house counsel jobs. Most in-house counsel jobs, and there are certainly a number of exceptions, but generally speaking, you'll see that many in-house lawyers do come from firms, and many of them were litigators. There are certainly exceptions, as I've said before, but my best advice for this is to do your research on the individual company that you're looking for, and again, see where those folks came from. You can use the company's website, or you can use LinkedIn to determine where they're usually getting their general counsel or assistant general counsels from. And I want to talk a little bit about firm size. I've alluded to it before, but most firms are smaller than the big firms. And I know that sounds kind of silly, but I'll show you some information in a few moments. But I think it's important to recognize that if you are really interested in a private practice, really consider what the smaller firms in your community might offer as far as experience, as far as relationships, and as far as opportunities outside of the on-campus interviewing process. I think looking for ways to market yourself to a smaller firm, if you have, previously helped out with family businesses, I always think that's valuable to include. I think it's important to include a little bit more on your resume than you might have for on-campus interviewing. I think doing the research on those firms, seeing if there are alums in the area, seeing if you can get an introduction, and frankly, I think it's perfectly okay to just submit your materials. Some of them may not have a structured program. So if you're really interested, I think it's okay to just reach out and tell them that you're interested and show them how you can benefit them. To give you some data behind this, the class of 2017, those employment numbers show that 54.3% of graduates last year went into firms under 50 lawyers, which is of course a majority, right? So a lot of the firms that people are going to are much smaller. So keep that in mind and do some research on firms that might have a more specific practice area that you are interested in. I wanted to take a moment here to just briefly talk about regional job fairs. Those are still going on, and a couple of Google searches in your area or interest or affinity might help you determine which job fairs might be appropriate for you to apply to. So I'd encourage you to spend some time researching those. Okay. So if you've gone through that initial analysis that we've talked about and you've decided, okay, maybe private practice isn't for me, I want to try something else, I want to offer a few suggestions of things that I think you should be thinking about right now. I'm coming back to judicial clerkships here because judicial clerkships can be a really great, sometimes long-term career, right? There are career clerks where people who work for judges their entire career, or at least a large chunk of them. They can lead back into public sector jobs. They can lead sometimes into education, depending on what you want to do. So I think judicial clerkships are a great opportunity to explore a number of different paths after law school. So I wanted to mention them here as well. And then, of course, this is a very broad topic, right? You have public service, nonprofit, government. This encompasses quite a lot of jobs, but there are a few resources that I wanted you to be aware of. The first is Equal Justice Works. Equal Justice Works is an amazing organization that offers a lot of great resources for students and graduates. They have postgraduate fellowships, which I would encourage you to look at if this is a path that you want to go into. But I also wanted to make a plug for their 2018 Conference and Career Fair, which takes place October 26th and 27th in Washington, D.C. Now, at this time, we're at the end of September now, it's too late for the actual job interviews, the structured career fair. However, it is not too late to sign up for the conference or to participate in the table talks. And I do know students who have received jobs from table talks. So if this is really a path that you're interested in, I'd encourage you to really think about the conference and do some research on it. It's generally a very informative experience. Next, for those who are interested in doing federal work, USA Jobs is sort of the portal that you have to become familiar with. I think whereas in on-campus interviewing, you're generally encouraged to have a one-page resume and to keep your materials very succinct. I would suggest to you that USA Jobs, you may think about a different strategy where you really do try to include much more of your experience, and you try to really expand on the things that you bring to the table. But this is the portal where all of that happens. So it's good to sort of become familiar with these types of jobs. And then, of course, the Department of Justice Attorney General Honors Program is something for folks to be aware of as well. This is an opportunity for you to get into a federal attorney recruitment program. And I think becoming familiar with their process, when you are eligible, how the application period starts and ends, and where they are hiring most, that certainly depends on the year, that depends on the administration, it depends on a lot of different factors. So do some research on them. They offer a lot of great webinars for folks who are interested as well. They have a lot of resources online. And finally, I want to spend some time talking about what I'll call JD careers, but what you will often hear called JD advantaged careers or JD preferred careers. These are careers in which a bar license isn't necessary, and you aren't traditionally practicing law. However, the fact that you have a JD is what is really valuable. And you'll see these jobs in a lot of different spaces. You'll see them in federal government. You'll see them, for example, in companies like LexisNexis or Westlaw. You'll see them through political jobs. You'll see them for, career professional jobs, talent management, higher ed, law firm administration, banks, finance, etc. So you see these types of careers in a lot of different spaces. To sort of get you started on that, I'll recommend NALP. They have the 21st Century Legal Career Series. Those offer some helpful guidance in how to navigate these careers and how to think about these careers, but they're much more industry specific. So if you're really interested in going into finance, you need to explore financial institutions. There's not really a hub for JD Advantage jobs in the finance industry. So you have to become familiar with the terminology within that industry, but a little bit of research can go a long way on these particular areas. And to give you a sense of the growth of these types of jobs, if you look again at the latest employment data, you'll see that JD Advantage jobs are a majority of education jobs in the legal profession, really a huge chunk of the business jobs. Private practice jobs also see JD Advantage careers, and then you'll see them, of course, in government as well. So there are a lot of different opportunities in this space. It's definitely worth exploring. I myself am in a JD Advantage job, and I can tell you they can be very, very rewarding. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Emily, who is going to share her story, and then we will open it up for questions from you. So Emily, take it away.
All right. Thank you, Joanne. And wow, there's my picture. So I did not put together as nice of a presentation to click through as Joanne did, but I'm going to tell you my story. It doesn't lend itself as well to slides, but I get to put everything that Joanne just described into life and describe how it worked for me through my career. I have been out of law school probably, if I'm adding up, maybe 15-ish years. And my law school career and career since then has not followed what I would consider a traditional trajectory. When I was in law school, the students who came in, I felt like my law school expected us to come in and go through OCI, and they expected us to want a career in a firm, and preferably a large firm doing defense work. Transactional litigation didn't matter, but, a law firm is what they wanted. And, go through OCI, preferably get a job at one of those firms. And then you took the job and you went to that law firm and you spent your 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years on the partnership track. And at the end of that, hopefully you made partner, and voila, you were a successful lawyer. And I went to law school, and that was not my plan at all. I didn't want that. I used to joke and say I was the only person who went to law school never really wanting to be a traditional lawyer at all. That was not what I wanted. So, I went to Career Services and, popped down, in front of the Career Services director and, basically described that wasn't me. I didn't want that. And at the time, they weren't really sure what to do with me or people like me, although I've heard that my law school, and I think a lot of schools, have gotten much better. Joanne's presentation shows that they've gotten a lot better at figuring out what to do with students who don't want to go that traditional route. So, I tried to explain that to them at the time, that what I really wanted to do, my plan A was I wanted to go to DC. I wanted to work in government, and I wanted one of those non-traditional legal jobs. I wanted to work on the Hill. I wanted to work in government, and ideally with obviously a legal degree behind my name, but I wanted to work as a legislative staffer. So that was my plan A. And if that didn't work out, I thought if I had to go to a law firm or do something a little bit more traditional, I wanted, my plan B was to do something, in a law firm, maybe if it was a little bit more policy based. That was sort of my plan B. And I came from a family of educators. And so I thought what interested me, subject matter wise, was school law. So I expressed an interest in doing that. I was in the Midwest at the time, so you figure DC's all the way on the coast. I was in the St. Louis area, so DC wasn't close by, and I quickly learned that there was really only one firm in St. Louis doing school law, and that firm was a big firm that really only hired students that were in the top 5 to 10% of the class. So obstacle number 2 for me was my property grade after my first semester sort of ruined those chances for me of being in the top 5 or 10% of my class. My grades weren't bad, but that was going to be a little bit out of reach to get hired by that firm based on my grades alone. So I had some work to do there. So I had plan A and plan B, and as a backup, I decided I likely needed just sort of a backup plan C to work with. So I worked with Career Services to some extent, but when it came for my dream job of DC, I was explaining, back in my day, they pointed to these catalogs on the wall that had all these lists of internships in DC, and that was a bit overwhelming. That was basically their advice to me. The school law, the advice was, well, there's this one firm. And then, OCI was really their answer to firm jobs. Or, if OCI didn't work out, they did have some other local law firms that they would recommend. So I decided very early on in my law school career that I was going to have to do some of this on my own. And I had to make a plan, which is exactly what, Joanne said. I sat down and made a plan for how I was going to market myself, how I was going to strategize to get myself to where I wanted to be. I'll come back to DC, but in terms of the school law plan, I was a political science major in undergrad, so I didn't have substantive educational background. I wasn't a teaching major or anything like that. And my law school didn't really have a lot of coursework that was going to provide that substantive background. So I could go to the law firm and say, hey, my grades may not be what you want, but here's how I can sell myself to you. So I decided I was going to market myself through doing some outside work to try to show my interest in this area. I was fortunate that I did have parents who were educators, and they helped set me up with some outside people, experts in the field. I found a professor at a different university who often wrote law review articles, and I reached out to him, and we co-authored a law review article in the area of school law together. So this really wasn't for my law school experience. It was just for me to get some substantive experience in the area so I could use it in a cover letter, in some other aspect of marketing myself to a school law firm, if not in my local area, but someplace else to show my interest in the subject matter. I also attended a conference with my father. I didn't have to go with him. I didn't attend sessions with him, but it was just a conference, a subject matter conference for school law. It was for educators and legal professionals, and usually conferences like that have really good student rates, discounted rates. And I attended, and I found all the sessions that were aimed at attorneys, and I attended those. Usually you get attendee rosters ahead of time, and I went through and found all the attorneys on the list, and I made contact. I simply went through and sent emails to some of the attorneys and asked if we could go for drinks or coffee, just to sit down to do an informational interview, just to ask about their practices, just to get information, get their advice. What should I do to market myself in the field? And this goes back to, you can call it networking. Networking to me feels a little quid pro quo-ish, but I like how Joanne said it. It's often how I say it. It's building relationships. It's building friendships with people. It's not necessarily waiting till you need something to start building those relationships. It's seeking advice, staying in contact with people, whether they're able to help you or not, because you never know. Maybe someday they'll be able to help you even if they can't right then. But it's showing an interest in them as a human being, as just a person. And the sooner you start doing it, the better. Maybe you can help them someday. It's really the way to go. And I did have one firm, if they had a boutique firm in the Atlanta, Georgia area, they were kind. I stayed in contact with them and actually had an opportunity. If we had wanted to move to Atlanta, there would have been an opportunity there. We ended up not taking it, but a lot of that came from those relationships that I started, through that process. Also, in terms, just quickly, I did get informational interview in that larger firm in the St. Louis area through my career services office. I didn't end up getting a job through that, but I made some contacts. Later, probably 5 years later, that department broke apart. A smaller firm broke off. I stayed in contact with some of those individuals. Ended up getting a job offer out of that as well. I ended up not taking it because I was in a different career at the time, but just staying in contact with people. Joanne said it in her presentation, just because something doesn't work out right away, right out of law school, doesn't mean if you don't start making contacts and you keep those relationships going, that 5-10 years down the road, an opportunity might not present itself again. So that is my story of Plan B. Which would have, if the opportunity had been there and I'd been the right time and place, would have worked out if I hadn't already started down a different path. I went through OCI and did some of those other opportunities, but my real plan was to go to DC. And I had picked the law school that I went to because they had a clinic that you could take part in during your third year. That took you to DC. So that I felt like was going to be my ticket to go to DC. I don't really know what I thought, if I'd thought about the fact that you had to apply and get accepted to that clinic. And if I hadn't gotten accepted, I really don't know what I'd thought if that hadn't worked out. But luckily I was accepted to that clinic. So that put me in DC for my final semester of law school. For that process, you could get a placement either on the Hill in an office, or you could go to a federal agency. I chose to go onto the Hill and was placed in Senator Kennedy's Judiciary Office, which was a great position to be in for that final semester. I got a lot of great work working on the Judiciary Committee. So, it was, free work, internships, going to DC. It's basically free labor, but you get to get in there and you really get to establish yourself with that committee while getting law school credit. So clinics, if you get in any type of clinic, you get great experience. Excuse me. So I highly recommend them while you're in law school. In DC, I was able to, do work in the office, and after, I felt like I had, done good work and they liked me, I expressed an interest of, hey, if I want to stay in DC and do this type of work, what do I do? The staff in that office, including the chief of staff, basically indicated to me that, Senator Kennedy's office doesn't hire people right out of law school. It's just a policy that they have. But they liked me, and what they said that they would do for me, and they were actually hiring at the time, is that they would take a look at my resume and they would let me sit in on interviews they were doing and look at the resumes that they had coming in. So I was able to adapt my resume to the way that they needed to look on the Hill and sit in on interviews so I would see what good interviews look like for the Hill. And I could adapt my interview style to what they would be looking for. So, advice that I would have is if you're, I feel like based on my law school experience is you're very well groomed to go interview as part of a law firm hiring experience. But if you're going to transition into a different type of industry, such as going into government service or potentially for a judicial clerkship or something that might be a little bit different, find somebody who's already in that industry and see if you can talk to them about their experience so you know how to adapt yourself to what they're going to be looking for in that process. So I was able to do that. The other part of that process was I used the people in my office as I got to know them to set up informational interviews. The Hill worked a little differently than law firms. They're not going to hire people, months in advance. When they need to hire somebody, they're going to do it, basically, within a week or two. So I was out there for 4 or 5 months for my internship. And I spent that time every week. I would set up informational interviews with people. I would get names starting with the people in my office, and they would give me names and say, go talk to these 5 people. And it was non-threatening. I didn't need a job. I couldn't take it if it was offered to me. So I would just set up coffees or, a happy hour, anything, and just go sit down and talk to them about their experiences, get their advice. People love talking about themselves, so they're perfectly happy to tell you about their experiences and give you advice. They're more than willing to do it. Then never hesitate to ask. And they would give you advice on their resume, my resume, where they thought I should start. I would never hesitate to ask them at the end, can you give me another person I should talk to? And I just made it a habit, every week I would set up more, fully expecting that, 5 months from then when I was looking for a job, I would be circling back with all those people. But by the time 5 months went by, I didn't have to, because at that point I had somebody come to me saying, hey, we have a job, can you send me your resume? And that's how I ended up with my job on the Hill, basically as counsel for one of the Senate subcommittees. So that's how I ended up with my first job out of law school. It was an amazing job. I spent 4 years as counsel in the United States Senate. After 4 years and September 11th and anthrax and the DC sniper, we decided maybe we would return home to St. Louis. So it was an amazing experience. But our first daughter was born out there, and I was pregnant with my second, and our family was back in the Midwest in St. Louis. And my husband and I decided that it was time to return home. So we decided to head back. Obviously, working on the Hill in St. Louis isn't really possible. And I had already, passed up the opportunities to do the school law. The commute to the part of that firm that had broken off wasn't really in the cards. Where we wanted to live, that just really wasn't a possibility. So in returning back, I used the contacts I had in the senator's office to set up, get contacts back, locally to where we were moving back to. And when we moved back, I was pregnant. I wasn't going to return to work right away, but I started as soon as we got back. I started making those contacts, made it clear that I wasn't, looking for a job right away, but I wanted to come in and meet people, and said I would, circle back in, a year or so, and hopefully, there would be a position available. And that's how I ended up with my job in a law firm. So I finally ended up back in a law firm, even though that's not really where I intended to be. It was a plaintiff's law firm. I did business litigation for about 4 years. And in about that fourth year, my department took a totally different angle. We decided to do plaintiff's class actions. I had no interest in doing that, but I jumped on board. I was hesitant for about a year. I wasn't sure if I was going to stay or go. I didn't know, but after giving it a try, I realized that, interestingly enough, plaintiff's class actions and class actions in general have a lot of policy base to them. There's a lot of congressional and legislative action with them. It actually had a lot of aspects of, not school law, but a lot of the foundation that I wanted if I had to go to a firm and do firm work. And it's funny how things work out that way. I ended up loving doing plaintiff's class actions. After about 4 more years, I was at that firm for 8 years, had an opportunity through another friend from college and law school to make another shift. It was actually with a large defense firm, a firm that I would not have gotten an interview with in law school due to the 5 to 10% of your grade, restriction in OCI. But through a lateral hiring process and through, having a foundation with my career success and good work, those things were less important at that point, 10 years down the road, 12 years down the road. It's your work product at that point, and reputation and recommendations that are much more important. I ended up taking a job at that large law firm. I was there for 2 years. And then actually the firm I'm at now contacted me really out of the blue. They actually had a position open, once again doing plaintiff's class actions. I don't think I realized how much I'd missed it. And this is actually an unusual work situation that I'm in. The firm is actually located in Southern California, and I work remotely from St. Louis. But I opted to jump back on board. I used to work with them as a co-counsel at my prior firm, and so, once again through connections, that's how I ended up back where I'm at. So that is my story, very quickly in a nutshell. But just my takeaways for you from my story, and based on what Joanne said, is basically nothing's forever. Everything you do gets you experience, and where you start isn't where you finish, obviously. And, who knows if I'm finished or, opportunities come along. Don't be hesitant, to jump on board and see where they take you. Get experience. Any experience is good experience. If you have a dream job, don't give up on it, particularly if it doesn't work out right away. I was fortunate that my dream job, did work out right out of law school, but after 4 years, life took us in a different direction, and I couldn't be happier than with what I'm doing now. And if you notice, plaintiff's class actions wasn't in bucket A or bucket B, when I was in law school. And, my number one tip, make relationships, start relationships, build relationships, bar associations, ABA, professors, your colleagues in law school, anything. Just start building those relationships, because they will help you, even if not immediately. Even if you're taking what you think is, just kind of a job that is just not anything like what you want to do. Build relationships with the people you're doing it with, because those people can come in handy, 5, 10 years down the road. So good luck, and, it will all work out, I promise.
I think that's amazing advice, Emily, and I completely agree with you. I never thought in 100 million years that I would end up doing career and professional development, but truly life comes at you in some surprising ways, and I really couldn't imagine doing anything else. With that, we're running out of time. If anyone has any questions, they can feel free to submit them and we will answer them. But if not, we really thank you so much for participating in today's webinar, and we look forward to you continuing to connect with the ABA, with the Law Student Division, the Young Lawyers Division, the Litigation Section, and the Career Center. And thank you so much for joining us.